Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, why is Governor Wes Moore, who credits his education as his salvation, denying other poor Maryland children the same? How is Mark Elrich playing games with the budget? I-270 expansion plan is dead. What's plan B? And guess which state is ranked as fifth worst to retire in? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by former County Council member and CEO of SkillSmart, Mike Knapp, and Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. Let's be candid here. The voting public is generally unaware of what goes into the fiscal plan and budget of a county where there's 1.2 million people. They know it funds schools, police, sanitation, and well too many bureaucrats. To them, it's all about it. That's about it. Montgomery County budget is too big, too complex, too arcane, and for most people to understand. They know they pay a lot in taxes, that their schools are more interested in teaching activism than education. They know crime is up because there are too few police officers, and they know traffic is a nightmare because the county government won't build new roads. They also know when their taxes go up, and this year taxes are going to go up a lot. My county executive, Mark Elrich, has proposed a $6.8 billion operating budget, which includes a whopping 10-cent increase on the property tax rate. Having been on the county council, you know that Montgomery County taxpayers just don't like property tax increases. In fact, 3 times in the past 30 years, they voted approved limits to how taxes were raised. And 3 years ago, the charter limit requirement, now you can correct me on this, I read it as unanimous vote of the county council. So is there a shell game going on by the county executive?
Oh, I don't know if it's a shell game. I just think it's obfuscation and trying to raise taxes at a time rather than actually make the decisions that you need to do when leading. To your question, it's not clear how many votes are required to pass a tax increase this year. Typically, the charter amendment that was passed a few years ago indicated that you had to have 9 council members, which at that time was a unanimity of the council. Now that we have 11 council members, it still says 9 council members in the charter. So does that mean that it has to be unanimous, or that there are 9 of the 11 that have to vote to approve it? So that's not.
I love loopholes, don't you?
It's great stuff. And as I understand yesterday, council staff and county executive staff are actually working together to try and figure out how many votes are required to pass the budget right now with the tax increase in it. You said it's 10 cents, and I think it's important for people to understand that while it's 10 cents, it's also 10%. It's a 10% property tax increase. And so 10 cents doesn't sound like much. 10% sounds like quite a bit. So I think it's important to understand.
If you've got a $500,000 house, it's another $500 in taxes, right? Because you're paying about $5,000 right now annually in taxes. So Mark,
the game, real quick though, the game the county executive's trying to do though is to say that this actually isn't under the charter limit because of the new blueprint for education that the state is putting forward. There are some local funding requirements in there, and so while his $300 million for the school system isn't necessarily required for that blueprint, he's trying to say that it is, and so as a result that it's a state mandate and therefore doesn't fall under the charter requirement. So he's trying to play quite a few games with this right now, and I think people need to be very wary of that because there's still not a plan for how to spend that $300 million. There's not clarity around we're going to improve test scores, we're going to go after the green zone and the red zone as we did with Dr. Weiss. There's not a plan, and we just want to spend $300 million more dollars. And so, as is often the case, we're just going to spend a lot of money at a time when we just had a windfall from the feds. We rebased how the property tax was calculated, which generated a lot more additional revenue. And now, because we don't really have any good plans, we don't want to make any decisions, we're at a point where we're just going to increase revenue again and raise taxes.
Well, I don't want to, Mark, I'll get to you in a second about the follow-up, but a question for Mike. You know, Mike, it seems that the State Department of Education really is the driver on school spending, isn't it? It's not really the county.
No, the county can, well, the county can drive what they want. I mean, we can have a plan. You can be working with the superintendent to develop a plan. There are certain requirements that come from the state, and the Blueprint for Education has certain requirements, but it doesn't necessarily require in a county like Montgomery to raise taxes to get there. We have sufficient revenue to meet the requirements for the Blueprint for Education.
All right, so Mark, let's pivot to see who's in favor of this and who's against this. And according to analysis done by Adam Pagnucco, the county budget would increase across the board 7%. And Gino Rene and the unions have come out in support. So has the Board of Education President Carlos Silvestri. I guess they know where their bread is buttered. But where are the opponents to this? I mean, if Mike is correct and you need 3 opponents to vote against this bill, who's going to be in opposition? We haven't heard anything from the council. So is Andrew Friedson going to be against it? Marilyn Balcom is very new. We don't know where Marilyn might go on this. And Stan Katz, who has traditionally been against tax increases, we don't know if he is the third vote. So who in the council is going to stand up for taxpayers?
Well, I think you mentioned the possible candidates. Obviously, any one of the 11 are potential votes against it. And some have obviously indicated that they want to go
Well,
forward.
who else?
But let me just kind of focus, though, on, look, we've got an implied or an explicit business model in Montgomery County of high taxes for services. And one of the key things that you described there is there's not a linkage. I think Mike described that there's not a linkage yet that says that this money will go for these improvements in services. And we've seen a deterioration in education. That's been part of that business model. We'll have great test scores, great schools, and that's what you're paying your taxes for. And I think really there's a conversation in addition to the tax that needs to go on the service side of delivering those services that people expect. Without that, I think the opposition will be that much stronger because people don't necessarily see the benefit.
Well, I think that's the dramatic story, is that especially coming out of COVID, the shockingly low test scores that are going across the board, except for Asian students. I think Asian students is the one demographic where there was a report of good testing scores that came from it. Mike, in addition to what the county executives proposed, since we're talking about taxes, Kristin Mink and Will Jawando want to increase the recordation taxes, and they've got, when buying a home and refinancing a home, and then they've, I guess, want to allocate that to some kind of affordable housing fund. But it seems to me that's totally counterproductive in trying to keep home buying affordable.
No, I think there's a lot of mishmash policies moving back and forth. So we want to put a cap on how much you can actually increase rent. We want to increase taxes. We want to make it more unaffordable to purchase a home. I mean, all of these pieces are kind of running counter to the direction you want to go when you're trying to build an economy, especially with the threat of a recession. And we know that probably income tax growth is going to be flat to marginally increasing. And so our challenge is, how do your policies coordinate back with what you're actually trying to do with your budget? And I've yet to see any linkage that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, there seemed to be, a lot of mud being thrown on the wall to see if it'll stick, but not really any coordinated plan. Particularly, I'm particularly disturbed about affordable housing because they seem to be going in different directions all the time as to try to how to fund it, how to fix it, and they just kind of want to throw money at the problem, and that isn't always the best solution. We're going to go on to our next topic, which is one I love, because I was driving on it last night. For the tens of thousands of residents who travel I-270, the Beltway, every day, the news that the toll lane developer Transurban has withdrawn its proposal to expand the Capital Beltway and I-270 was a bitter revelation, although not unexpected, I guess. The decision by the company, the Australian company, came after it realized that the Democratic Governor Wes Moore was unlikely to support the highway expansion. Moore's office, however, put out a press release that said transurban withdrawal has no bearing on promised federal funding or the state's commitment to addressing congestion issues affecting the region. I don't know if we all can believe that, but Mark, what's going to happen next?
Well, it remains to be seen, that we certainly have an example of what Transurban can do. Not that that's the only company, but it was the one that was selected. Drive around the Beltway, go to Virginia, and you can see an example of where, if you want to go faster and you're willing to pay, you can go on express lanes. If not, you can stay in the main line. These lanes have worked very well, not just in Virginia, but specifically in our area in Virginia. I was with an former elected official from the People's Republic of Arlington, who naturally is a Democrat, who I saw this week, who said, "What's wrong with you people in Maryland? Why aren't you building this stuff?" It's kind of a reminder of just how different the temperature is in Virginia across the party line on transportation issues, where there's a all of the above approach to transportation solutions, as compared to Maryland, where we really are not moving forward, and congestion is getting worse.
Well, Mike, I was reminded last night as I drove the ICC, of when I was running for the council in 2000, being asked whether the ICC should even be built. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm so glad that was done by Bob Ehrlich and during his administration. Who in the council really is going to stand up for the up county residents who need better transportation solutions? And I'm going to quote Councilwoman Marilyn Balcom, who said the council needs to come up with a solution, and it's not going to be a bus.
Yeah, no, she's exactly right. I mean, we've been advocating. When I was on the council 20 years ago, we were advocating for the Quarter Cities Transitway, which would be a light rail extension. We were advocating for increasing width lanes on 270. We were at least pushing for, to your point, Mark, all of the above. We actually voted to approve the ICC. We were actually moving forward. We actually got the Purple Line funded. There was a time when we were actually getting things done. Again, albeit more slowly, I think, than our neighboring jurisdictions, but there was progress. You said, we had our conversation beforehand, what's the plan B? There is no plan B. We don't have a plan B in Montgomery County right now. In fact, I'm not sure we have many plans in Montgomery County right now. And I think when it looks to the up county, there's a real challenge there. And I think that Marilyn will be a strong advocate, but she's one of 11. She's got to find 5 members to vote with her. And the other piece that candidly has to happen, and Adam, who we've referenced quite frequently, articulated in his piece earlier this week, is the up county residents have to vote. I mean, they've got to show up at the polling place and be able to say, look, if you're not willing to do this, we're not willing to vote for you, especially for our at-large members. And we've not yet done that effectively to a point that people are listening.
Well, I'm going to wrap this up because we have to go to break. But the Washington Post came out this week with an editorial suggesting that Maryland or Montgomery County adopt ranked choice voting. I think that's a terrible decision, but also recognizing that we need the Republican Party and independents to come out and vote in their best interests and not just the party line. Anyway, we got to go to break. When we come back from this short break, which state is the 5th worst state to retire in? It won't come as any surprise. Stay tuned. And welcome back. In his book, The Other West Moore, Maryland Governor Moore described the sacrifices that his mother and grandparents made to pay for his education to a private military school. So it's surprising somewhat that Governor Moore is now allowing a voucher program that was passed under Governor Hogan that subsidizes low-income students in the state to attend private schools to wither and die from lack of funding. Mark, several weeks ago, you brought up this topic as a parting shot, I believe, how Governor Moore was allowing the broadening options and opportunities for students today, or the Boost program, which is an equity vehicle for families to remove their children from failing schools and I want you to expand on this.
Well, this is a tiny little program. It captured a considerable amount of attention. It's 10 million in total, which is just like less than 1% of the total education budget. But as you said, it provides, again, only families that are in the lower income families that are qualified for the meals program, to take what is a fraction of the amount of money that we spend per school, so that it's money that would otherwise have to be spent for public education, to go to alternative schools. And it is just really heart-wrenching to hear from the families that are worried about being locked out because of the state not going forward in funding. I'm hopeful. The leader of the Senate, Ferguson, has talked about possibly funding it, has heard from the families. And it's also interesting, I'm going to just take a moment, the governor, Wes Moore, when he was CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, one of the things that group did was improve educational choice. Not Maryland, up in New York, but it is something that I would hope that he would appreciate, is the opportunity to provide for a ladder up for kids that would otherwise be trapped in subpar education.
So, Mike, Governor Moore is getting pushback from the Senate President Bill Ferguson. It's not a surprise necessarily, because Baltimore County had the greatest recipients of funding from the Boost program, the most number of students who took advantage of it. Is this bill going to die this year, or what's going to happen, do you think?
Just given what I've seen, there aren't that many things that have bipartisan support. This actually seems to be one of them, with the exception of kind of the governor's reduction in his budget. But I think with the increased funding that you're seeing for education in general, to Mark's point, it's such a small percentage that it would seem to me that if you're going to increase funding writ large at the level that we're going to keep this program funded at the $10 million level that it's been funded at in the past, seems as though that actually makes sense and is consistent and doesn't really undermine anything else. If you're scraping to pay dollars between public education and private education, okay, I can see we want to have that kind of a discussion. But at a time when we're going to make a significant investment in broader public education, and given the small percentage of this and the bipartisan support behind it, it seems to me as though it's something that you're liable to see funded at the current level.
So, Mark, the Boost program provided funding for students from failing schools in Baltimore County, as we mentioned, biggest recipient, but also Baltimore City, Prince George's County, and wait for it, Montgomery County. So, shouldn't this program really deserve the funding that was anticipated before?
Well, as you mentioned, it was used by families across the state. I think not every county, but I think there was sort of the overwhelming majority of the jurisdictions. They had some opportunity. Look, education, we've learned, is not one size fits all. There are a variety of ways that kids learn. Providing opportunities for the right way for a kid to learn is really incredibly important, and that's really a ladder for success for the future.
Well, look, I think studies have shown time and time again that quality education is the route to success in our society. It is the civil rights issue of our time. Every child should get a quality education. And if we don't figure out a way to do this, now personally, I'd have vouchers for everybody. Let them, you pay your taxes, get a voucher, go to the school of your choice. If you want to go to the public school, fine. If you want to use that voucher for private education, fine. But, parents have got to be engaged and determinative of what's going to happen to their children. Anyway, we got to go on to our next topic. And this is one that, is kind of frivolous in a way, but it's also serious. Magazines like Kiplinger's and Wallet Hub annually produce lists of the best and worst places to retire. It's clickbait. And of course, I'm 70. I'm going to click on it. I want to find out what the heck's going to go on. So who wouldn't want to know where they can retire in their golden years comfortably and not have the tax man knocking at the door? Now, we don't have music here, but if we did, Carolyn would be cueing the Beatles, "I Am the Tax Man," coming on the, maybe she can do that on the video. Anyway, the old line state didn't fare nearly as poorly as it did last year in its rankings, but it still made the bottom 10 all the way down to 5. So according to my friend Clark Kindle, the president of Kindle Capital Management in Rockville and the author of The Middle Class Millionaire, Maryland, it not only has an income tax, but we're also one of the only 7 states that has an estate tax. And from a financial perspective, there are a lot of things to consider. Mike, what's going on here?
Well, I think it's a real situation that we've got to pay attention to. We started our show talking about the budget and why we need, the county executive wants to increase taxes. The reality is, if you look at where the resources and where the revenue in our county, in Montgomery County in particular is, it's with those folks who are actually reaching a point where they can retire someplace else. And so when you start looking at that and creating disincentives to stay and incentives to leave, it really only further exacerbates where we started our discussion. And so I think it points to the county and to the state trying to moderate back to a place that allows people to stay here and age in place, as opposed to looking to go somewhere else because of the tax situation. And I don't think we take that into account near seriously enough.
Well, we've been talking, this show has been going on so long. We remember the millionaires tax that was imposed and the green flight that occurred afterwards. Mark, Maryland may not tax Social Security, but it does tax IRA income. That's fair game. So is that another disincentive?
Well, it is, but one of the key points to keep, I mean, we think in terms of Florida, but look, we also live in a region where other jurisdictions with lower tax rates, i.e. Virginia, Delaware with sales tax, are nearby. And so there are alternatives that people have to live here without having to go very far. And increasingly post-COVID or post the 2017 tax law, we are in a more competitive, among jurisdiction, a more competitive environment where people are voting with their wallets, if you will, and moving someplace where they think they're being treated more fairly.
Well, I won't quote the scandalous quotes that were in the Wallet Hub article, which derided the quality of food and in Maryland by calling it just boil water and put a can of tomato soup on it. But we have a real issue, and we got to wrap it up because we're running out of time. It's an interesting topic to talk about, and one that I, of course, am now imminently concerned about. Stay tuned for Parting Shots. Welcome back. Now with Parting Shots, Mike Knapp.
Thank you, Casey. As it turns out, this is a week I've had a number of board meetings, and it's also AMU fundraising week. And so it's one of those things that it reminds me as we come to the end of our show that we have a lot of wonderful philanthropic organizations and nonprofits in Montgomery County that serve the arts, that serve the homeless population, that serve everything in between. And I just would encourage folks, as we kind of are moving into spring and people are doing their house cleaning, to think about those organizations that make a difference to you and in your neighborhood and that you feel passionate about, and to make contribution to them.
Thank you, Mike. Mark Uncapher, your parting shot.
Well, unfortunate news this week. We learned that the Tasty Diner in Silver Spring, not the Bethesda location, but the Silver Spring location, closed very unexpectedly. We send out our commiseration to the customers, certainly to the employees, and also to our one-time colleague, Susan Heltemus, who would routinely host meetings there. It's going to be missed having that great location in Silver Spring.
Thank you, Mark. And I will just give a brief announcement. I am now a grandfather. For the very first time, my son, his wife Carter, had a little baby girl just this yesterday, Thursday, and we couldn't be more excited. So I'm all good wishes to all the grandparents out there now that I've joined the club. Thank you, Mark and Mike, for being with us this week. Thank you to the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 this week, I'm Casey Aiken.